would like to welcome all of you. I am Melanie Musselman. Many of you know me. I am the secretary of our Homemaker Council. Our program for this afternoon is uplifting and also inspirational. Mike and Melanie Musselman have been blessed in many ways over the last 2 years with many people who have helped them along life's ways with their son Luke. Many blessings have been received over 2 years, and you will be blessed hearing about many struggles they have been through and how they overcame many. Let's welcome Mike and Melanie.
Thank you so much, and as she mentioned about the many blessings, as a lot of you know, that sometimes we have to endure a lot of hardships to get to those blessings, and I think we're on the way there. I mean, we're still enduring some of the hardships, but you know, we can definitely see the blessings through this.
And we know through our journey that we have met many different stories, and I'm sure many of you also have a story of some challenges in life. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today and share our story with you.
And we want to say up front, you know, that this is our experience of this challenging health condition with our son, and you know, it's not meant to offend anybody. But this is our experience, and it's going to be real, it's going to be raw, we're going to tell it like it is. And so, you know, there's going to be maybe some laughs throughout the program, maybe some tears, maybe, you know, a little bit of anger. We have felt all emotions through this journey. And, you know, right now we can definitely, like I said, see a light at the end of the tunnel, but we have definitely been through it all. Okay. As we said on the programming, that the title is The Brain Inflamed, Losing and Saving Luke. And it's very important, or very, that we have this program today, because actually the National Pans and Pandas Awareness Day over the nation is tomorrow. And this has only been recognized not very long, but we were able, and further on in the program, we'll talk about that we were able to get one in Kansas here as well for the first time this year. Some of you may know Luke. He is Vernon Lee's grandson, of course, our son. And actually, I was trying to think back how many years ago that he came to this actual program, and he displayed one of his geography display boards. And that was, I remember him, we had it set up right over there by the door, and you know, he talked to some of you ladies and he told about it. And so some of you may know how he was before all this hit him, but this is our opportunity to kind of tell you about how he was before all this set in. He was very accomplished, not only in school work, but also in community work with our 4-H club. He excelled in spelling and geography and maps. He loved maps. He participated in the state geography bee in Abilene 2 years in a row after winning his school bee. That's the picture right over there on the right. He also was a very accomplished speller. He got first in his grade for the written part about every year that he participated. And he also participated in the regional spelling bee in Topeka. He excelled in 4-H, as I said, and he joined FFA as a high school freshman. He was also an altar server at our church, St. Peter and Paul Catholic Church here in Clay Center, and he was basically a normal kid. So, in fact, some people even have told us that they didn't even know that he had autism, which he had high-functioning autism before all this hit him, but he never needed an IEP in school because of his autism. Whereas, you know, some kids throughout their school years need an IEP, and that stands for Individual Education Plan for the student, where they're given accommodations. He never needed that in school. And he never needed an IEP until this hit him in 8th grade. Okay. So as we go through here, you know, I have made a narrative because on different occasions you know, we've had to keep track of his progress, and so this is about a 9-page narrative about his history and about what all he's been through. And so I'm kind of going through it a little bit just to kind of give you a background about what he has been through. So the first signs of OCD for Luke came in February of 2016, and he was retracing his homework assignments. And this is not an exaggeration when I say this, that it would literally take him 3 to 4 hours to complete approximately 6 algebra problems. So just let that soak in. 3 to 4 hours to do 6 algebra problems. You know, an average student might take 30 minutes to an hour to do it. So that's what was starting to affect him, was his schoolwork. The OCD became progressively worse, and he had a hard time eating. And then, you know, that's when it started to become serious, because it would take him 3 to 4 hours to finish a meal by himself. And that's not an exaggeration either. And, go ahead.
At that time too, about, I think it was in March, February or March, we started to see a counselor to try to help us with Luke's situation. And, you know, they gave us some suggestions, but in trying those, Luke was smart enough, he really warded off those suggestions. So,
well, and actually, you know, we started out with our local provider, Pawnee Mental Health, you know, and started trying to see some sessions with her. And actually, you know, I'm not sure if we went to here at Clay Center. I know we went over to Marysville some, but it was over and above. I could just tell it was over and above what they could do. And so that's when we consulted a psychiatrist and psychologist in Manhattan. And our first appointment with the psychiatrist to get started on some psychiatric medicines was in March of 2016. And our first appointment with a psychologist who specialized in OCD was May of 2016. So we had quite a long wait for that. And he progressively became worse and more shut down with the OCD after school ended. That was his 8th grade year. He became very resistant to take his prescribed medicines, and it was even hard to get him out of bed in the mornings or for him to keep a regular schedule.
okay, so to most of us, a description of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, would center around more typical of somebody being afraid of germs, so they wash their hands all the time. This was not typical OCD. It was more compulsive, that the feeling just wasn't right for Luke. So a little bit different in the fact that it wasn't as much obsessive as it was the compulsive behaviors.
So this is when we had to make our first heart-wrenching decision of this whole journey. Is, you know, we had to do something. He could not go on at home. So with the help of the psychiatrist in Manhattan, he spent 3 weeks in the hospital the summer of 2016. First at Stormontville West in Topeka for 11 days, and that was at the psychiatric unit.
And we had limited visitation. We could only see him 1 hour at a time. I believe it on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. 1 hour was our limit to see him. So he was removed from any visitors except for that 1 hour.
And just to give you a story about that, I remember it's etched in my mind pretty deeply. When we went there, it was in the evening, because we had an appointment that day in the afternoon with the psychiatrist in Manhattan, and we made the decision that we were going to do it. Well, we didn't take clothes along with us to prepare or to pack for Topeka, so we had to go home from Manhattan, pack, and go back to Topeka. Well, that was quite a long night. You know, because I don't think we ever got there even probably till 10:30 at night or later.
I think it was midnight.
Yeah, and so it was just it was a bad situation. I mean, because we had to do an intake interview that lasted for probably an hour. It was just, from what you can imagine, it was just a nightmare. I mean, actually, I mean, it's not like we were admitted him to jail, but it almost felt like that way. I mean, just because, you know, here we were giving up, not giving up rights to him, but I mean giving up care to him for a while, and it just, I almost couldn't get through the intake interview. So yeah.
And you know, along these lines, this whole syndrome that he has, you know, we talk about in our community mental health, and it's very important that we understand that this is a medical condition that his mental health deteriorated with. So a good part of this, and I think really honestly, you know, I'd like to say this anymore, mental health a lot of times needs to be drawn back to something medical. The two, in my opinion, go hand in hand. There's usually something medical is underlying that causes a mental state.
And so after he was at Stormont West in Topeka, you know, he was able to get started back on his medications consistently. And then after that, we transferred him directly from Topeka to Children's Mercy South in Overland Park. And if you can get this, when he went to Children's Mercy, he was only 81 pounds. Okay, so that's how much restrictive eating he had. It wasn't your typical anorexia per se, but it was just restrictive eating is really what it's termed as, because he would have so many rituals concerned around eating, like sticking his tongue out, or I don't remember all that he had, but he had so many of them at that time that, yeah, he would stick his tongue out, or he'd have so many times before he'd put it up to his mouth that he would eat it. So it was just, yeah, it was just a nightmare, basically.
And I remember, well, while he was at Topeka, they did a lot of testing as well to rule out things. He did have an MRI to rule out, I can't think of the condition. There's a condition that, I'm lost right now. But an MRI, to rule, anything out that would, be simple.
Structurally in his brain if something was happening.
So, and the pediatric neurologist met with us too, and he said that a couple diseases need to be definitely looked at, and one of his statements too is, in the 36 years that he had practiced, he had never seen a condition quite like this. So, and I remember too, with Luke's restrictive eating, it took him, when we checked in the Children's Mercy that evening, it took him literally, and he did this by himself yet, but it took him 1 hour to eat just a hamburger.
So yeah, referring back to the comment what Mike said about what the neurologist at Stormont West said about the 36 years he'd never seen a case like this. Well, later on, when we finally got it diagnosed what it was, I'll interject this story in right now. I sent him, I don't know if I sent him a letter or I sent him a voicemail saying that this is what it was. If you have any cases like this in the future, please let them get checked out further to see if anything else is going on. And, this is what it is. So just to let you know, this is what it ended up to be. And I get a letter back saying that, well, he basically refuted the whole diagnosis. He said that's not what it is. If the doctors would go away on this condition, the conditions would go away. And so, yeah, that was my last straw with him. And so, yeah. So I keep telling Mike, though, that eventually when Luke gets better, that I'd really like to see him again and show him that this is living proof, this is what it was. And you are doing your patients a disservice if you don't refer them on to a specialist. Or if you think, if there is something that you think that there is something wrong and you don't refer them on further, that's a disservice.
And my thought always was, I had enough respect for doctors that I just took it for granted that when you went to the doctor, you got better. And so we just always took that for granted that they knew best, but doctors are only human. And I think it's a good story that if the gut feeling is there that, something just isn't right, I think it's important that we do due diligence and continue to investigate. We can be our own best advocate for our loved ones.
So when he was at Children's Mercy there, that was the picture on the left there, we were extremely worried for his overall health and knew that he couldn't sustain 81 pounds because he was 5'5" at the time. So he was in the eating disorders unit at Children's Mercy, although they classified his condition as disordered eating because of the OCD. So he required an NG tube, and that's what you see there in the picture. Basically what that did is that stands for nasogastric tube. And so all that did was feed ensure drinks directly to his stomach. So then he could get the, just catch him up on nutrients and get him back to a healthier weight. And so he had that overnight. He ate regular meals during the day. He just had that overnight. So that's what we tried to help him get supplemented up with overnight.
And honestly, in just short of a week's time, he gained back about 10 pounds. And that's when Children's Mercy said, okay, he's stable, we're going to release him. We maintained then, they taught us on the NG tube how to place that and take it out. And, so he was well on his way. At least he was not at risk anymore. He was gaining weight.
And so you see there, when he came home then from the hospital, he did better in July, August, and September of 2016. Well enough that he was able to show his lamb at the fair there with his NG tube still in. We were able to graduate from that. He was like the beginning of August because he went to a STARS camp at Rock Springs provided by Pawnee Mental Health. And so he was able to go there.
And also, I just want to interject too, during these times too, Luke was dependent upon us to take care of him. I mean, we had to help him shower, go to the bathroom, eat. I mean, we were basically his caregivers at this point in time.
So at this time too, we had a psychologist from Katie's Way in Manhattan who we first sought treatment from in May, and he was, seeing him about twice a week. He also received occupational therapy, speech therapy, and physical therapy from No Stone Unturned in Manhattan, and they're affiliated with Katie's Way. So, he was trying to get back on track, and we thought he was back on track. But that was such a grind to take him to Manhattan 2 or 3 times a week with all those appointments, all those therapies. And a couple of stories I wanted to share, just some really vivid memories in my mind from that summer. There was about one time when he was doing speech therapy that I remember that, he was in there, he was struggling to work with the therapist on, simple speech therapy techniques, something that a grade schooler would be able to do. And he was just struggling on saying the right answer, and I had to leave the room. I had to go to the bathroom, but I went to the restroom and I cried. I just couldn't sit there and see him struggle anymore, so I just had to leave the room and come back and collect my thoughts and come back. Another time, I remember waiting in the waiting room, and there was all these young kids around there, and it was just like I was, we were waiting for him to go into his appointment, and I was just thinking, we don't really belong here. Luke, this is not really the right place. I mean, I credit them for trying to find the right place and the right therapies for him, but it just wasn't the right place for him. And I was just thinking in the back of my mind, to deal with this, it was almost like I was writing a book, and I told Bernalee this, I still may write a book about all this. But it was just like, in my mind, I was dealing with it by, like, I was just describing in my mind what was going on. So like I was a third person in the situation. So that's how I was kind of dealing with it. And so, since I'm a communicator and a writer by training, I think that's just what kicked in. That's how I was dealing with it, like I was covering it or something. So, like I said, I still may write a book. So yeah, we thought we were on the right track at that point, but as things progressed, we weren't quite on the right track.
And so we get into fall. I mean, Luke's in school, and we're trying to do our best with him in school. That was a real challenge. And I can remember just, kind of October and then November, and it was our goal. We actually had Pawnee Mental Health staff coming out, helping Luke some at that point in time too, because he was deteriorating. And I can remember it was our goal one day, the Pawnee staff and I, to get him ready and get him to school, and we never accomplished the task. He never made it to school. So we knew at that point in time we weren't going the right direction. And then from there, I'll let you
Yeah, so we had, as Mike said, care attendants coming from Pawnee Mental Health to help us at home. This, and at that time it was around the clock, wasn't it?
No.
Okay.
It just kind of hit and miss kind of when we needed, I think when we needed staff.
Okay. So, but as it progressed, we could see it was too much for us to handle, too much for Pawnee Mental Health to handle. And so we had to make our second tough decision of Luke's condition. You know, even more difficult than the first one. He went to a residential treatment facility, Lake Mary Center in Paola, Kansas, and that was the day before Thanksgiving, November 23rd, 2016.
And literally, when she says the toughest decision, I mean, it was, we knew Luke was going to be away from home for a period of time. We didn't know how long. And it literally took his psychologist coming out to our house to get him, to talk to him so that we could even make the journey. And he wasn't even successful. I remember I was the one that carried him out to the van.
And so Lake Mary is a residential treatment facility. PRTF is what it stands for. And they also have a school there. They specialize in children with autism and other intellectual and developmental delays. And he gained weight there. He made it up to about 100 pounds, but they didn't really have the specialized OCD treatment, which he actually really needed. If you can see there the picture, you can really tell. Look how skinny his face looks. And I don't know if you can tell from back where you are sitting, but he has dark circles under his eyes. I mean, you could really tell that he, you know, was sick there.
And again, you know, we got him back up to almost 100 pounds in the fall, but when he started regressing, he was, at this point in time, about that 81 to 84 pounds again.
And so at Lake Mary, they only allowed him approximately 1 to 2 hours of therapy per week. And so that's why he needed a residential treatment center in the first place, because we were doing 3 times a week, and that wasn't enough when we were seeing his psychologist in Manhattan. And his psychologist in Manhattan agreed, because if he said if he could have had a residential treatment center there in Manhattan to provide for him, he would have done it, and we wouldn't have had him to go away. But it wasn't available. So again, the second time we were at a loss of what to do. There was no really place for him to go, just like the first time. And so his therapist at Lake Mary, you know, told us that any interaction with their staff was therapeutic. Well, that might be true for most cases, but it wasn't for Luke. As you could tell, he was suffering. He needed very specialized OCD treatment. And as far as for specialized OCD treatment, we have done our research on where that's available at in the nation. There are very few treatment facilities in the U.S. that offer the exposure response and prevention therapy, and that's what OCD requires for the child or the individual to get better. It's called ERP therapy. I made calls to Wisconsin, Massachusetts, Texas, Colorado, Illinois, Ohio, and Nebraska. And we checked out Rogers Memorial Hospital, the most serious. I checked out them quite a lot. In Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, because they offer comprehensive OCD and anxiety therapy for adolescents. The only problem was that Rogers did not offer one-on-one care in their facility. And so I was even on the intake interview for them, you know, and they were asking me questions, and Luke had to be right there as well. And so when I found out that they didn't offer one-on-one care, I was devastated, because, I mean, this is one of the premier OCD hospitals in the country, and they don't offer one-on-one care because his OCD was too debilitating.
So basically, like Luke said, well, I'm too sick to go to the hospital. Does that make sense? I mean, that's really where we were at. You know, we're trying to find the proper place for him to get help, and it just was. What I really want to say is his mom, you know, was working very hard to find that place and communicating, you know, advocating for Luke, you know, we need help, you know, and the help wasn't truly coming, because when he went to Lake Mary too, I still remember, this isn't the right place. We need to be in a hospital. And tell a story right now too, his pediatric neurologist that's at Salina here, well, maybe I ought to wait until let me wait on that.
Okay, so anyway, back to about him going to Rogers in Wisconsin. And even Luke figured out, you know, and I gave this example to other doctors like his primary care physician, and he agreed with me. I said, okay, this would be like a cancer hospital turning away a cancer patient because they were too sick. Okay, do you ever hear a cancer hospital doing that? No. So why would they do that for an OCD patient? I don't know. But it's like, okay, you're too sick, you have to get better before you can come here. And yeah, even Luke said, you know, because I think they told me, well, when he is able to do his average daily living tasks, you know, like take a shower, get dressed, get ready himself, then he can come up here. And Luke even said himself, well, if I could do all that, I wouldn't need to go there. You know, so honestly, yeah, he still got it even though he was sick. He still could have it together enough that he figured that out. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide here then. And so yeah, that was when we were celebrating his birthday. And you can, like I said, you can tell that his face was very thin. And this was, I must have that other slide later on, or the other video. Okay, this was just when we were visiting with him at Paola at Lake Mary. You can see, well, he still has his braces on. He didn't get that out until a little bit later, but you can see his face is still pretty skinny, and you know, you can still see the effects. But there was many times going back and forth to the PRTF. You know, we would go back there about every weekend to see him with the kids. Sometimes we would just have Mike and I go, but there was many times on the way back home I'd be crying. There's many times that when he was away from home I'd be crying at night. It was just, yeah, something that was hard to describe, and I hope I never have to go through the dark places again that I went to when he was away from home. Let's see. Oh, why don't you talk about the like he missed meals at the.
Oh yeah, and you know, that was one of the toughest things, having a child away from home. You know, it's one thing for us to be with our loved one in a hospital, navigating care, making sure that things are done correctly, asking questions. We had to ask questions more or less over the phone to his therapist, you know, make sure that he was getting the proper care. And I remember even on weekends, sometimes they were understaffed, and Luke did miss some meals, and that concerned us very much. But literally, we were told that, you know, oh, we're understaffed and we're doing the best we can. But that's just how it was. And, you know, back in February, you know, honestly, they were working hard to get him back and eating. That was our first goal. That we knew Luke, if he could get back to a better state with eating, and with his nutritional state, that was going to be medicine itself. And I don't remember exactly what he weighed here, but we charted that weight, and he was making good progress. So they did have him on the right track. It just took a lot of time.
And you know, if you're wondering, well, like what kind of OCD rituals did he have, or what actually was his behavior, just think about kind of, I mean, he wasn't like at that time, he wasn't like a defiant, like a child with a behavior problem. It was more that he wasn't ready to move on. So he would literally bite, scratch, hit, etc. Not only us, but some of the staff there. And so that's how bad it got. He would have to be put in safety holds by the staff at Lake Mary. And of course that, yeah, if I remember right, Christmas Day wasn't very fun that day. I remember. So yeah. As we progressed, though, let me go on to the next slide. I think that was ready. Yeah, in February there you can see that they do have a barn there at Lake Mary, and this is at Paola, south of Kansas City. They do have a barn that they built there, so they do have some goats. So Luke was able to get outside and kind of work with some animals that he was used to, so that was good therapy for him. They had some sheepdogs there as well, and so that was fun for him to do that. And you can see there by the next picture in April, he does look better. I mean, he had gained quite a lot of weight at that time. So in between there, though, in March is when we first finally started to get some answers about his health. In March of 2017, we consulted Dr. Roger Kobayashi. He's an immunologist with Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology Associates in Omaha, Nebraska, about a possible PANS and/or PANDAS diagnosis. So once again, PANS, and we haven't described this yet. What are you going to say?
And again, right here, she was diligent about finding the answers. She's the one that sought out Dr. Kobayashi. The psychologist sent, how many notes did he, pages of notes?
Well,
there was numerous pages of
I
notes.
faxed him 47 pages of information of Luke's medical history.
So again, I mean, we asked the psychiatrist at Lake Mary, you know, is this condition, PANS or PANDAS? And he dismissed it because, again, the medical community, it was a very controversial diagnosis.
And it still is.
And still is, and that's why we're trying to create this awareness so that these types of things don't happen to other people, because there is a network of people that have stories very similar to ours.
And so once again, the PANS condition stands for Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome, and PANDAS is Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorders associated with streptococcal infections. So basically, kind of how I describe it, it's a strep-induced OCD, or infection-induced psychiatric problems, and that's what it comes down to. So yeah, I faxed him 47 pages of Luke's prior medical, psychological, and psychiatric history, and from his records, he approved him for a Cunningham panel of blood work. The Cunningham panel, just to real quickly give you a look into that, it helps to identify the level of autoimmune antibodies associated with neuropsychiatric disorders and the capability they have to stimulate and trigger neurological behavior. So it's kind of a blood workup, a panel that they do. It's not conclusive, so it has to be up to the immunologist or the doctor to say, okay, with this blood work, he does have PANS or PANDAS. So it's more of a clinical diagnosis. It's not a cut and dried blood work.
But that's the issue again. We had the blood work, but Luke was, again, really too ill. When we went on outings with Luke, a lot of time the staff at Lake Mary had to load him in the van. I mean, at this point in time, he was responding to them and doing, you know, quite well for them. But mom and dad, you know, then it was a fight. And it was very difficult for us to work with Luke, going to church on the weekend or, you know, going on outings. And so that's why in this process, it took so long to diagnose this. We had the Cunningham panel in March, thereabouts, and the results of that. But to get him up to Omaha, we didn't know how to do that because we knew we couldn't strike out alone with him because we couldn't physically get him in and out of the vehicle by ourselves without, you know, a lot of aggressive behavior. So
yeah, as we mentioned here, Luke was finally diagnosed with PANS on July 26, 2017 by Dr. Kobayashi in Omaha. And this is a graphic that I used when I did an interview with Jamie at KCOY on Up Close. And you know, this is about what the infection causes for symptoms. And it's anorexia or restrictive eating, changes in handwriting, and if you remember back as we started the presentation, I said that his symptoms started when he was tracing homework assignments. So that's where his started. Tics, and if you don't know what tics are, it's just like, there is a condition that's similar to what children can have called Tourette's syndrome. That's when they have like the involuntary tics, like maybe a twitch, or they say something that they can't help, and that's similar to what it is, tics. Luke, I would say, has more like verbal tics, like he'll get started on something like a phrase or something that we say, and then he'll repeat it kind of over and over again. I think he has control over it, at least he used to be able to, but sometimes I don't know quite how to describe that now, but he still had trouble with that. Emotional lability, obsessions, OCD, hyperactivity, depression, behavioral regression, which Luke had a lot of, irritability, he had a lot of that, and still does at times, difficulty concentrating, yes, aggression and rage, yes, bedwetting, yes, sleep disturbances, and yeah, well, and he did that even before he came on with this, though. So that could have been the autism, and then sensory abnormalities. So we finally were vindicated, and you know, that we finally sought out and got the right diagnosis for him.
So yeah.
This kind of goes through what PANS and PANDAS is. As I mentioned there, what it stands for. Both are neuropsychiatric syndromes triggered by a faulty immune system response. And PANDAS is a form of PANS. Children may experience symptoms after a strong stimulant to the immune system, such as a strep infection, flu, or even the common cold. In a child with PANS or PANDAS, the immune system mistakenly reacts and causes brain inflammation in the basal ganglia region. And this is from the National Institutes of Mental Health.
And going back, it didn't take our doctor, the immunologist, very long to diagnose Luke, and he did start a regimen of antibiotics, which Luke currently is on a rotation today, a little bit different antibiotics, because that's a little bit trial and error with fighting the infection. It kind of is child specific, so it takes a doctor to kind of experiment with the right antibiotics, but he also had a dose of steroids that I feel it really did help, Luke probably the most to fight off the brain inflammation. The steroids got in there and went to work.
So this reaction may cause neurological, psychological, and cognitive symptoms as a result of the neurological inflammation. So basically, his immune system is not working properly, and it's attacking his healthy brain cells that controls impulsivity and aggression and other behaviors that look like mental type behaviors, but it's really from a basis of a medical condition. Okay, so as Mike mentioned there, it's treated with anti-inflammatory medications such as ibuprofen. Luke has been on full-time ibuprofen twice a day since May now to help with the inflammation. Also the antibiotics to treat or prevent the infection, and immune modulating therapies such as steroids, intravenous immunoglobulin, IVIG, and plasmapheresis. He has been on, like I said, antibiotics since July of 2017 continuously. And Mike says, we have rotated between different ones to just get the right mix. He has an underlying infection of Mycoplasma pneumonia, and what we think back and pinpoint that to is his 7th grade year, even before his 8th grade year when all this came on. His 7th grade year, he thought, or he had a very bad cold. He coughed for like a month and never could get over it. I even tested him for whooping cough, and that was negative. And so that had to have been the Mycoplasma pneumonia, that he got better with the physical, the outward symptoms like the cough and the cold and the runny nose or headache, fever, those types of normal things, but then it settled in his body and he didn't ever get over it then. And so then, more than other conditions, PANDAS, PANS, and related conditions can produce sudden, uneven, and unusual symptoms. For some kids, it's a sudden overnight change. Luke, it was gradual. And so that's why I think it was a little bit harder for maybe some doctors to diagnose it, because it was a gradual thing. It can, co-occur with other autoimmune disorders, immune deficiency, or other neurological and psychiatric disorders. For Luke, it's autism. So that's what his comorbid condition is. And so that's why his treatment and management is more complex. Because as has gone through his treatment, his behavior psychologist from Kansas City, who's been directing his treatment since he came home from Lake Mary, since August of 2017, sometimes kind of fights with that as well, that, is this the PANS condition, or is it his autism that's making it hard to treat?
Or even being just a typical 16-year-old. Okay, here's a video for you to watch. This was Luke back in January of 2017, and
where do I see that?
so this was a visit that we made, and I just was videoing him a little bit to kind of remember and chart, some progress and just how he was. But I'm not sure if the sound's going to come here, but all he's doing there is just saying, we were trying to get him to talk and say something. I think just say hello to, I don't think his mom went that weekend or something. And the thought process was going, but he couldn't verbalize this at this point in time. The inflammation was bad enough that it caused this state of condition.
That's okay. Now how do we get back to the other? Yeah, so like Mike said, all he was doing there, he wasn't even talking anything there. He was just going, and you can see he's kind of doing a few ticks, moving around. It's kind of fidgeting is kind of what it looks like, but but he was kind of doing some little bit of tics there with his mouth. You could even see a little bit, you know, he was moving his mouth, but he wasn't really saying a whole lot. And so, so yeah, he was basically unresponsive right there. And I mean, not unresponsive in the sense that he didn't know what was going on, but just unresponsive, he couldn't communicate, you know. And so his pediatric neurologist right now, who we're seeing from Salina, we showed her this video, you know, after the fact, and we said, you know, this is how he was in January of 2017. What should we have done? And she said if he would have been my patient at that time, she would have admitted him to the hospital right away and gave him IV steroids or IVIG. So that's how we were kind of behind the game. That we were behind at that time. So now that you kind of know what the condition is, I'll go through some of these other characteristics and symptoms. How are we doing on time?
Getting close.
Okay. Anxiety, obsessions and compulsions, tics or involuntary movements, changes in handwriting and academic performance, and we exactly saw that for Luke. Reduced attention span and inability to focus, changes in personality and behavior, and changes in eating and sleep habits. And let's see, that's just, I'll just play this so you can see it. You don't really need to hear it, but this is when he was trying to, this is in our house at home when he was trying to move from like the threshold, you know, just walking across different, carpet to hardwood floor. And he wasn't able to do it. See, he had to like get himself psyched up to do it, and like he was jumping. That's just, he was trying to walk. And this was when this was right before we brought him back home. That was August of 2017, isn't that right?
Yeah, that would have been in August, and I mean during the summer of 2017 too, to kind of accelerate his treatment, we were taking him to Kansas City Center for Anxiety treatment, and a lot of time Melanie stayed back to take care of the other kids, and I went to Kansas City with Luke for that treatment. But I can remember still one day during treatment, we were working with Luke and going to the restroom, and as he came out of the restroom, he just hit the floor crying. And I mean, the exposures that we were doing just really stressed him out. And you know, he was trying, but it was just difficult. And again, that was before the antibiotics and the steroid was on board. And we'll show you a video here shortly once we get the steroids and antibiotics on board.
So yeah, the PANDAS network puts out a statistic that 1 in 200 children are affected by PANDAS and PANS. And again, it's infectious triggers such as strep, pneumonia, and Lyme disease can cause sudden onset neuropsychiatric symptoms. And again, what we've been stressing today is this is a medical disorder, not behavioral. And so early treatment is important. But he does play it, and he gets started in a little bit, but he is able to play it, and he hadn't played something like this since the previous May. You know, so he had been away from that. And so, but he was able to play that
by ear.
By ear.
I mean, he didn't use the music. It was just he had played it enough. He just played it.
Yeah. So and so that's one of the ways that we knew Luke, the normal Luke, was coming back. So yeah, we do want to talk about though that here before we talk about kind of more currently, he did have a setback again in January of 2018. We were trying to take him off some of his psych meds that he was on, and that didn't work. We found out the hard way that it really was not the right decision to make.
So therefore, it went back to that tough decision that we agreed that he really, with these current psychologist at that time, behavioral psychologist, decided that he probably should go back to a PRTF, which we, had already been, and nobody would really had room for him or with his condition didn't want to accept him. So what we ended up doing is and this is a positive thing, with Pawnee Mental Health, we drafted up our own plan to include the respite house to where Luke, yeah, that was in Junction City, where Luke would go down there during the week and they would get him to school. He did his showers and his morning routine with them helping him, because home, there were so many distractions at home that it made it difficult for Luke to do that routine, and we wanted Luke to work on that independence of being able to do that again, and that was some good medicine for Luke. And I remember too, as a part of this back in January, we decided to start a steroid treatment again, and sure enough, it helped. He made progress through January, February, March, and here we are into April at Easter time. And yeah, the medicine was really key to the behavioral treatment. The two went hand in hand to help him make good progress.
And that incident when Mike was talking about in January, where his behavior psychologist recommended him going to a PRTF, it was kind of back to one of those like desperate moments again. I mean, he was getting a little bit aggressive and raging, and she wanted him to go to the ER, and then they admitted him somewhere from there. Well, we've already had been down that road. We knew that if the ER would accept him, that he might just have to go back to Stormont West. Well, we knew that wasn't the place for him at all. So I dug my heels and I said, he's not going.
And actually, in talking to his regular doctor, I remember the nurse saying too that you probably would have erased all the progress that you made by making that decision. That if he would have ended up there, it would have been devastating to Luke, because the PRTF was already devastating enough. That if he would have went back to that place,
well, they weren't going to accept him. We already knew that. They not only didn't have room, but they decided that they weren't going to accept him again. So I think that was maybe because, they knew that they had helped him all that they could when he was there prior. Either that, or when he was there, we fought with him enough that they didn't want us to come back. I don't know. I don't know. So anyway, yeah, I mean, we were respectful to them, but let's just say that we were firm enough that we weren't their typical parents of kids that were there. Let's just put it that way. So yeah, these are some, pictures again of Luke's progress during the springtime, and you can see that he was able to get back into his normal activities in FFA, at the district banquet, and at the chapter banquet, and then at confirmation with Grandma and Grandpa. And he was able to make confirmation at our church in May. And he was able to go to about all of those classes leading up to that, and he was able to talk in an interview with our priest, and so the priest could see that he was making progress, and all of his teachers there and the kids at church are very supportive with him and just helping him along.
And during the spring too, he was attending school half days last spring, and he was in a special ed room. We did try to move him to the regular classroom. We found some progress in the regular classroom. And jumping forward, today he's basically in 2nd to 8th hour in school, and from 2nd through 6th hour he's in the regular classroom. His assignments are modified a little bit. He spends a study skills class 7th hour, and 8th hour is modified English for him. But this was at the Clay County Fair this year, and I honestly can say that Luke did better showing his lamb at the fair this year than when he started to deteriorate in 2016. And I know many of you have seen Luke out and about, and comments that you make too to us that, well, looks like Luke's really making some good progress. We appreciate those, because we see Luke every day, and it's continued to maintain hope for us that Luke is getting better. But when people say, oh wow, when you really chart that progress from other people that don't see him every day, that's huge. That's huge for us. And
as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, tomorrow is Pans and Pandas Awareness Day. across the nation, and this is a map of what states have proclaimed it in each individual state. So the dark green is the ones that the permanent resolution has been issued. So every year in that state, Pans and Pandas Awareness Day will be observed on October 9th. So that's California, Arizona, Arkansas, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and it looks like in Canada, Ontario, Canada. The light green is what the proclamation has been issued, so that's Kansas, and that was our Kansas group that did that. And so you see that the green is becoming more prevalent as well. The blue is a request has been filed or accounted for. So the blue is, it's been made aware of at their state legislature, and so it's gonna hopefully go forward from there. When I said there about Luke and I made a video about PANS that will play tomorrow at the high school during their student improvement period, and that was all Luke's idea. He wanted to do some type of an awareness for Pans and Pandas. His first thought was he wanted like him and I to go to the library and talk like during SIP. And Mr. Young thought that maybe it'd be better if, you know, because not everybody can fit in the library, so he thought it'd be better if we just made a video and then distribute that among the teachers. And so we did that, and the AB teacher at school was very kind to help us put some more graphics on it. He did all that and put some more pictures in it, and so that's going to air tomorrow at the high school for the kids. And this is the picture of when we went to the state capitol in Topeka last Monday, October 1st, so just a week ago from today. Governor Collier officially signed the proclamation for Pans and Pandas Awareness Day in Kansas. And Luke wanted to go that day because, as you see, there are some kids that are afflicted with this condition that were there. I told Luke he probably better not miss school, but he sure wanted to go to that. And if you notice right here on the end, or on the edge, is Susan Carlson, our representative-elect. I have included her in on this process, and she even went to lunch with us after the signing that day, so I'm hoping that we can get her on board as she gets started in the legislature and get her support as we go forward. Because ultimately what we'd like to do is set up a state advisory council for this condition in Kansas, so to have like doctors and providers, whether it be medical doctors or immunologists or psychologists that have experience treating kids like this, and also maybe from a social worker aspect, as well as parents. So we can advise the state on what works for treatment in our state and get it easier accessible. And the lady, here, go back to that other slide. This lady right here, she is a doctor, she's a rheumatologist from Kansas City, and I said that she's in a very unique position because she has a, I don't remember if it's a son or daughter, but a child that has pandas. And so she can be a very good advocate from both the medical standpoint and as a parent for this condition. And this was just a story. You won't be able to hear this, but this was a story that KSNT did. Some of you might have seen this on TV that evening and the next day about their coverage of when our proclamation was signed. So you could probably just go through that, so we won't be able to hear that. And if you would like to get more information about this in the media, Brain on Fire was a book that this gal was a New York Times reporter. She had autoimmune encephalitis, and that's like a condition a step more serious than Pans and Pandas. She wrote a book about her experience, and then it was also made into a movie. Luke and I have seen that movie on YouTube, and he was pretty moved by it. And so, I mean, it's a very graphic, serious movie as far as it pretty much tells it like it is.
What's the name of it?
Brain on Fire.
On YouTube?
Yes. Okay. And if you have Netflix, I think it's available. It was available on Netflix here earlier this summer. I'm not sure if it still is, but it was available. Also, My Kid's Not Crazy was a documentary that was done. It came out in October of 2016, and that details different kids' experiences, very individual, you know, from the Pandas and Pans, from kids that were mildly affected to those that are very serious and have permanent damage because of it. And then also here this summer, there was a program on 2020 and Nightline on ABC about pandas. So that's still available online that you could even watch that, the one from July of 2018. So that might, is that, yeah, and so more information is available from the pandasnetwork.org, and then also Pans and Pandas Advocacy and Support Group, PAS.care. So are there any questions? We meant to say during the whole program that if you have any questions to raise your hand and ask us at the time, because I know at the end sometimes you might forget a question, but is there anybody that has any questions? Yes?
I have one. How about the cost of all this?
Yeah.
Sounds very expensive.
Yeah. Actually, one thing we want to have an opportunity to thank the community. When all this was going on with our son, we happened to have our daughter was in a serious car accident as well, near fatal car accident. And so our plate was overwhelmed. We were full. And so the community had a donation and had a fundraiser for us, and we sure appreciate all the support that was poured out at that time. The Methodist Church made a prayer quilt for our son Luke, and we appreciate that. And just all the little things that people have done that we appreciate your support, because that has made the difference. But the therapy that we got from Casey Cat was $20,000, and that was partially covered by insurance.
I will say that Medicaid has covered a lot of Luke's condition, and we've tried to advocate through the Medicaid system too, because it is a difficult system, and we've had to have some lengthy conversations sometime. And I've even talked to the office of the CEO with our MCO. We're going to continue to advocate there. And we just feel like the system is, it seems very difficult to navigate, but at the same point in time has tremendously helped our situation.
What was the dosage on steroids and how often administered?
Do you remember what that was?
I can't remember specifically. Back in January, I think it was 30 milligrams.
That's probably what we started out at, but remember when we had that other taper, we started out at 60.
It was always a taper, and the dosages varied, but 60, I think 60 was the most. How much did he receive when we did the IV, not the IV steroid, but we had 2 treatments of intravenously, just as outpatient. Do you remember what the dosage was there?
I thought it was maybe
40, but most of the time when he started his steroid, it was a taper. So if we started at 60, then was down to like 50,
for a week.
and then like might have went down to 45, 40, 35, 30. I mean, kind of a decrease of about 5 each week until his doctor was very conservative. He said, I don't like some of the complications that can come from steroids. But
our doctors, we've got kind of one conservative doctor who's the immunologist from Nebraska, from Omaha, and then we have a more aggressive doctor who's the pediatric neurologist from Salina. And so we like that both approach, because we can kind of decide which way we want to go and decide what treatment he is responding to the best, and then do that treatment. But from January through April of this year, he was on a steroid every day, something, from January to April, and then he picked it back up in May when he did the IV steroid, because he had the IV steroid in May for the first time.
And honestly, when he went off of it in April, we saw a little bit of regression. As he ended school, we did see some regression. But when he started in May and went off of it in August, he has, for the most part, maintained. So we know that we're making progress, and we've just been approved Friday to have him have the treatment of IVIG, and probably here, as soon as we conclude here, we're going to pick him up and try to get him to Salina, because he's scheduled for that, to try that treatment.
So yeah, that's going to happen, like I said, we said this week, and the IVIG again is the intravenous immunoglobulin treatment. And a lot of other patients in Kansas, the group that you saw there, their kids have already had this IVIG. Maybe they went to Chicago to have it, or Texas to have it. So as far as for treatment for this, Lucas may be, like I said, a little bit behind on that type of treatment. But yeah, it's the IVIG.
How How long does that take?
What we'll do with that, well, we had a couple different options. We could either have had it at an in-home infusion and an outpatient basis, but we chose to do the in the hospital. So it'll be in Salina, and it will be over a 5-day period.
Yeah, and there's different rates that doctors recommend on that type of treatment. I know some of these kids that you saw in having that treatment too have had more than one treatment. So it's just like back with what we dealt with the IV or the steroid treatment. But the reason that we want to have him in the hospital, there's a slim chance of complications from it, but you know, if there's complications, he's better off to be in the hospital because there can be allergic reaction. And you know, they use this immunoglobulin treatment for a lot of different medical conditions, so it's nothing new. But
It's used for a lot of like autoimmune disorders, or some of you may know that it's used maybe for maybe blood disorders or leukemia type conditions, but I know it's used in other treatments.
When he was little, did he exhibit any allergy reactions to anything?
Not that we know of. The only thing I remember one time is when he got a tetanus shot. His leg did swell up. That was like when he was 4 years old, and his leg swelled up excessively. That was like the shot that he got before he would go to kindergarten, I believe, tetanus shot, and his leg swelled up. That's really about the only allergic reaction that I remember.
Did you have him tested for any allergies?
At that time, no, we didn't. No.
What about you as parents? I can imagine myself dealing with this troubled little boy, and I just would want to scream and pull my hair out.
We did all that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even for myself, I mean, it's been difficult, you know, and I can honestly say that staying busy, you know, with busy work has really helped, and yeah, our faith obviously has pulled us through, you know, community members, you know, as well, and just taking the time to ask, you know, well, how's Luke doing, you know, has helped tremendously too, because I think that's a lot of the healing process or the ongoing progress. I mean, you know, Luke kept making progress, and that's how we kind of fed on that through his progress, you know, it really helped us maintain hope that we could get the child, you know, better. If you ever get a chance, the movie Miracle from Heaven, it feels like we're on that journey that mom went through in that movie. And, you know, Luke is, I mean, honestly, our journey is a miracle.
Yeah, and, you know, we always have put him on the church's prayer chains or the Hope Circle locally here in the Clay Center area on Facebook, and, you know, we appreciate all that support. And, you know, this has been, you know, we don't know why we're going through this, but kind of what our deacon at church said the other day to Luke is that, you know, God has put you through this, and you're going to be stronger for it, and he has a purpose for what he wants you to use this for, you know, and I firmly believe that. We don't know what that is right now, but we just, you know, pray that God will take care of him and hold out that, you know, we're all in this for a reason. And like what I tell people too is, you know, I never thought I'd be using my communications degree to advocate for my son, but that's what I've had to do, you know, because you never can rest. And that's kind of what we've been throughout this whole process is it seems like we always have to keep fighting, whether it be for the right treatment, for the right doctors, for the right insurance coverage, for whatever. We can never stop. We always have to micromanage his care.
And that's very important too. I mean, for us and what we teach our kids, you know, we want our kids to respect authority, but at the same point in time, if they determine that something's not right. For example, our daughter got a failure to yield ticket in Manhattan this fall, and she said, I didn't do anything wrong. So she fought that, and she won. She had to pay court costs, but I think it's a true story that, you know, we have to stand up for ourselves. Nobody else will. And as a parent, you know, we see this as a growing process.
Any other questions?